Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson and I'm so glad that you are here. Today we're going to be talking all things guns. It's not something I've covered on my podcast before, but I think it's really important. And the reason I thought of it was because I've basically been a hunting widow for the last week and a half, for sure a week. But there's time before the hunting too, because you got to get your deer stand ready and everything else. So my husband just got home last night from hunting in South Dakota too. So I picked up venison from the butcher yesterday, and then he came home with some pheasants from South Dakota. I'm really excited about that. And so when I thought about this issue, of course, many of you have heard of Rick Barrett, the armed Catholic. And so I wanted to bring him on to talk about that. But before we get into that conversation, please, if you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe. And feel free to join the Telegram chat that I have too. We're kind of growing that little community. It's just easier for me to be connected with you guys because I don't really like to hang out on social media all day. And so this is my way of interacting with people and learning more about them. I think that's way more fun anyway than the kind of dialogue that happens often on social media. So anyway, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with Rick Barrett, he is originally from the state of Rhode Island. And at the age of 25, he decided to move to Texas with only 2 suitcases to pursue a career in teaching social studies. After spending 10 years within the profession, teaching in classrooms from 5th grade all the way up to post-secondary education, he decided to move on and obtain a master's degree from Penn State in Homeland Security. During that time, he started a business and obtained a federal firearm license for 5 years. Rick and his wife attend the Extraordinary Form of the Mass in Waco and have done so for the last 2 years. And Rick is certified from the USCCA, and this allows him to teach a wide variety of courses from home defense to constitutional carry. And he has a huge passion for integrating his Catholic faith into what he does when he's out there teaching people about proper gun ownership and how to do all that awesome stuff. So thank you so much, Rick, for coming on to the channel today. I'm really excited to talk about this with you.
I'm always honored when somebody has a slow week and they ask me to be on their show.
Oh,
I'm always happy to do so. That,
yeah,
by the way,
right.
very nice with the way you integrated. That was very nice. I caught
you.
that. And
That
I
was
apologize in advance, everybody, because my camera is awful. So
no,
I'm going to be lagging all over the place.
that's
But
okay.
I am honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is the kind of thing that we should all be doing. Like when it comes to our careers, in some way or another, we should be trying to integrate our faith. You do it in a very explicit way. A lot of us have to try and do that more in an implicit way. And so I just think it's really amazing that you have done that because there is so much to work with there. So first of all, maybe explain why you got interested in this to begin with. I mean, Rhode Island, is that a pretty liberal state for gun laws? I mean, that doesn't seem like an environment that would really foster a love of gun ownership. Oh, you're muted.
That's
There we
par
go.
for the course.
No, that's okay.
I can't have a show unless I mute myself.
That's
So Rhode Island is strictly anti-gun. I grew up anti-gun, actually. I didn't shoot my first gun until I came down here to the state of Texas.
of course.
And we shot one, and it was completely awesome. And I've been about it ever since. So yeah, Rhode Island, very anti-gun, pretty much in line with the rest of the Northeast. The way you can sum up Rhode Island is that whatever Massachusetts does, Rhode Island does it a couple months later. It just has little brother syndrome. It just wants to be like the state of Massachusetts. We even had the worst Kennedy as a representative there at the federal legislature for a while. So,
we did the same thing in Minnesota with California. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yay, joy.
Yeah, I mean, liberal states follow 1 and 2 patterns. They either set the standard or they follow it. There's not much differentiation between the two of them. So I left there because there were no jobs, shockingly enough, in a liberal state, and came down here and was still pretty anti-gun until I actually met a guy playing paintball of all things, and then we went to a gun range and so forth and so forth. Really got into it, started the business. Because as a person that didn't know anything about firearms, Going to gun shows, which are a blast if you ever have a chance to go to one. They're not filled with terrorists or anything that the left wants to tell you about. And that's not an open marketplace. It's not like Lord of War. We're passing firearms around. But I would ask questions. What does this gun do? What does that gun do? And the gun community can be very insulated and be very judgmental if you don't know. If you ask a simple question, all right, what's the difference between like a 9 and a 40 Smith and Wesson? They'll judge you, especially as a dude, if you don't know what these things are. And it really upset me to the point that I started the FFL to just be a bridge and say, listen, man, if you don't know what you're talking about, that's okay. We'll walk you through it, because everybody, depending on your state, because I'm a big believer, you can say Steve Cunningham has rubbed off on me. I'm all about the state level first, then the federal. Texas, Article 1, Section 26, the right to keep and bear arms is guaranteed there. And so if you have that in your Constitution, then you should absolutely exercise it. Besides the fact the Catholic Church talks about your God-given right to defend yourself, right? The only person who the only deity that has control over when you die is God. That's the only one. Nobody else has that authority to take your life from you. So it'll be absolutely, oh, shush. As you can tell, that's how far behind I am on these. There's a little bit, but nobody has a right to take your life, and you have every obligation to defend it and do what you need to do. So that's kind of where those two things crash. After I left teaching, while I was working for my church at the Crusade channel, I was starting to think about other things I could do, and I'm good at instruction. I'm good at teaching, and I love firearms, and there is nobody else that does what I do in the gun space. And that is actively promote Catholicism with firearms. Our evangelical brothers and sisters, no problem doing it. They have no problem doing it. They have no problem integrating it. And I guess we'll get into this as we go forth. Catholics, especially a lot of Catholic men, get very icky when it comes to guns, because a lot of wives don't like them, or their priest doesn't like them. Ironically enough, there is a Novus Order church 5 minutes up the road for me that I drive by every weekend to go the opposite directions over an hour. But every once in a while, as we all say, we kind of get stuck for one reason or another. So my wife and I were sitting in a mass, and the priest was giving his homily, and he said, it is, and of course he's from Africa, because most of the Novus Ordo Catholic priests are. He's like, it is never good to shoot someone. And I looked at my wife and I said, I don't know if I'm going to spontaneously burst in this church then, if that's what he's thinking, because you have priests that will say things like that. And now and the reason I exist is because we have cardinals that come out and say we should give up gun rights, and we have bishops that say that. And what happens then? Secular media and even anti-Catholic gun guys, and they exist, unfortunately, get to rake us over the coals and do all these other things. And unfortunately, I guess it'll say it has fallen on me to be the guy that says, no, you can be a Catholic. You can own a firearm. The Catholic Church, tracing back to the 1500s, talks about self-defense and proportionality, and talks about all these things. If there's a problem out there, the Catholic Church has an answer for it. And that's why that's actually the title of the book that'll be coming out in the summer, The Armed Catholic, Applying Catholic Social Justice Teachings to Justify Self-Defense, out with Sophia Press. That'll be coming out next summer. And so the end is, yes, you can be a Catholic man as long as you are fitting within the rules of just war theory, and you are not being irresponsible. You can use it to defend yourself. And I'm also, I have to update that bio, because now I'm officially a licensed to carry instructor within the state of Texas. So actually tomorrow morning, I got a couple guys lined up at the range I work at, and I'll be doing the Texas license to carry course, which is a written course, and the firing course of fire. You do 50 shots and all that stuff. So yeah, it's kind of my thing.
Yeah, I'm reading here the traditional Thomist. Our friend Nicholas Cavazos is saying that the Bible says to own weapons. Quote, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise a scrip. And he that hath not, let him sell his coat and buy a sword. And that's in Luke chapter 22, verse 36. It is really challenging when the hierarchy, members of the hierarchy are saying things that are at odds with Catholic social teaching. And we've seen this a lot from the USCCB and even higher up than that. I'm thinking too, just so much of your story, when you got started, it really aligns with COVID. I have to ask you, did the lockdowns and things like that, did that inspire you, especially the way that the lockdowns were handled in places like Australia, where people do not have weapons, they aren't able to own guns there? Did that inspire you in any way to really talk about this really clearly here in the United States? I had to wonder when I looked at the timeline for you. What was that like for you?
That's a great question, in the fact that, yeah, I think COVID, it was pardon the term, a reset for many people in regards to how they view their relationship with their government at any level. And we're seeing it with things like the Covenant shooter, or the Lewiston shooter. We have this American optimism bias where, oh, our policemen will protect us. Oh, our government, yeah, our government's crappy. Our government's bad. But when it comes to it, they'll help us in the end. Although you look at things like Katrina and the fact that they actually confiscated guns during Katrina, or Hurricane Harvey in Houston, or any of these other things as well. We have been put into a position, and it's really Western civilization as well. If you look at Europe and Australia, we've all kind of fell in line post World War II, which I think the further we get away from World War II, the further we'll see how devastating it was to the quote unquote victors. But the fact of the matter is, governments cannot be trusted because they do not work for the people they govern. And the way they say that they govern, they feel they are better than you, even the ones that are supposedly on your side. If you watched any of the debate from last night, pretty much every single one of them wanted to bomb the snot they wanted perpetual war. They wanted more war, more money, more of these other things. And you and I are just pretty much blood from a stone that they're trying to pull from. So, long answer to a short question is, absolutely, COVID gave me a different idea, especially when a disaster strikes. I should have figured it out, having a master's in Homeland Security. When disaster strikes, it's funny, government retracts, kind of like a turtle,
Mhm.
because it's like it is a living being. It retracts to keep itself alive. And as you know, when a body shuts down with hypothermia, the exterior limbs die off because everything's trying to keep the heart and the brain warm.
Right.
So government's essentially the same thing. And so the idea of self-reliance, and that includes the ability to defend oneself, has really been shown during that time period.
Well, and not only that, so the government is one thing, and then on the other side of things, you have a lot of hostile actors, I guess you could say. I mean, here in Minneapolis was like destroyed
Yeah.
by Black Lives Matter and all the protesters, like the George Floyd protest, St. Floyd here in Minnesota. And it was wild. I mean, there were nights when I was worried it was coming out of the cities out to where I live, and I live 30 minutes outside of the Twin Cities, a little bit more. And there were protesters coming out to enact violence, or at least making threats of violence out where I live in a small community. Um, and so, of course, what's at the top of our mind? How can we protect our children?
Yeah.
But it is there. There is almost a dichotomy. There are these two extremes in the church right now of people who are saying, no, nobody can own guns. And you look at what happens when you have an armed shooter going into a school, like the trans shooter that we just got the manifesto from finally,
Right.
because of Steve Crowder. And of course, the manifesto said everything we expected, right? Um, at least it would appear that way. And then on the other end of things, you do have members of the church who are saying, well, you know, we shouldn't have guns. Nobody should own a gun. And I felt I'm seeing a correlation here between how the hierarchy talks about guns as the same way of like the way that they approached ignoring bodily autonomy with the vaccine. It's like you have no bodily autonomy in this regard. You have no right to defend yourself or to determine how to protect yourself, make those decisions for yourself. Um, How do you address that criticism then? If the church is saying one thing or members of the church are saying another thing, while at the same time they're talking out of both sides of their mouth because we have a lot of documentation of them reaffirming the right to self-defense. How do you address that when people
Uh,
are challenging you?
it's a great way to look at it, and the way I approach it is it can really be broken down with the introduction of liberation theology and the fact that liberation theology introduced by the KGB into South America and filtering its way up, really taking religion, and they went after the World Organization of Churches, which apparently was a thing. I found that out in my research, to really take people from the spiritual aspect to the physical realm, right? To focus on social justice things. And it's really easy to mask it. Oh, you want to help the poor? We should all help the poor. We should all help the sick. But it's like, we want to help the sick this way. We want to help the poor this way. And that's very much it, because you can trace back all the way back to the Council of Trent. Where is I got 1566, which you can find all this information at thearmedcatholic.com. I got a bunch of different things that actually magisterium, truth, a bunch of things that support it. The first one, if a man kills another in self-defense, having used every other means consistent with his own safety to avoid the affliction of death, he evidently does not violate this commandment. We all know the commandment we're talking about. But with the introduction of liberation theology and the modernization, which came in the form oh man, I'm going to get the year messed up, but it was in the 70s, the group that predated the USCCB, which was the USCC or something, USCC, the US Catholic Council or something like that. They put out something called Handgun Violence, a Threat to Society. You can still, the only place you can find this, ironically enough, is a copy of it at Notre Dame. They actually have it Xeroxed. And in this document, which was pushed out in the 70s, all the talking points that you hear today were introduced back then. So we see during that 60s, 70s revolution, which it was in the Catholic Church, going with the times, and that has pushed us to this point that we're at now. Because for the longest time, you had the Cristeros, you had the Spanish Civil War, you had all these instances where Catholics, with their faith being threatened, picked up arms to defend themselves. The Vendée is another example.
The
And the church,
Crusades. I mean, it was
yeah,
we're kind of
plenty.
notorious for crusading
Yeah,
and
right. Yeah, it's
defending the faith, right? Like that's what we do. Um, it's so funny because I remember being a college student, and there was a student I was running a pro-life organization on campus. And there was a student in our group. He was pro-life, but he was a very liberal Catholic, very par the course for the Newman Center community on campus, which was almost exclusively non-students, ironically, of course.
Yeah,
They were
that's how it works.
all right. They were all like boomer Catholics. And he just was raised there in this environment. His parents were Democrat Catholics, kind of
Yep.
like the John F. Kennedy Jr. type
Yeah.
ethos, until his dad got kicked out of the office for the Democratic Party in St. Cloud because he asked why there was a Somalian flag on the door. Anyway, and it was bigger than the American flag, of course.
Of course.
But
As it
anyway,
should
this
be.
right. So, but this friend of mine, he's a really good guy, but at the time he really was opposed to guns. And I remember we were in Washington D.C. Going to the March for Life. We're jumping on the subway, and he made some comment about it, and I said, "Why should I, as a woman, not have a right to defend myself?" He just felt like if something happens to you, you should just take it like a martyr, basically. That
Yeah,
it's
I
your
wanna
job to
jump into
take
that.
it like a martyr. And I thought having a gun is a great equalizer for me as a woman. I am not as strong as most men. I mean, I was in great shape at the time. My nickname was Mangela, but
Yeah.
I true story, true story. But I still, there's no way that I could like take on a 250-pound, 6-foot human being. There's just no chance. So what do you like? How do we talk about this in a way that acknowledges um, what a great equalizer having guns is, even for women? I mean, we talk about it, but it's true.
Uh, the first one I just want to get this in before I forget it. When people bring up the martyr thing, they try to get me on that as kind of like a trip up. Like, well, what about the glorious crown of martyrdom? Shouldn't we do that? Listen, somebody like me, if you ever knew about my past, it would be a blessing to get the glorious crown of martyrdom. However, as I tell all of them, if we get to that point, I'm taking as many of those suckers out beforehand. I'm not giving up. And so that's how I approach the martyrdom portion. Secondly, the fact of the matter is your soul is the most precious thing out there. And the fact of the matter is, nobody has a right to force, especially not being the potential the idea of not being in a state of grace, or maybe not being at that point, having the that being tossed upon you, and being sent to judgment before you can get fully prepared. So the whole fact of the matter is, you also have a right that you shouldn't be violated, or anybody shouldn't be violated, because that is we teach that, hey, you're not supposed to rape or do these other things done to you or done to other people. So the fact of the matter is, the Catholic Church has always said you should be able to defend yourself. Now, if it's a life or death situation, but the cause of using a firearm, obviously, for now you're getting into the legalistic argument, which is fine. We can absolutely go there. The proportionality argument. Even somebody like me, not a big dude. I'm only 5'6", so I guess you could say a normal size man, is threatening my wife and family, then a firearm is an equalizer for me as well. The
Yeah.
thing that kind of gets me every time is when people who watch too many Marvel movies or too many action films are like, well, why don't you just know kung fu? And I'm
Oh,
like,
why don't you just shoot him in the foot?
and,
It's
or
like,
the
what?
shoot the gun out of his hand. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that none of that works. But the fact of the matter is, if you have the ability to use so, or the very terrible joke I say is, there was never a call for sword control because one person's sword was longer than another. Like, it's not fair that your sword is a broadsword and I only have a dagger. No, nobody ever said that kind of thing. So this idea of putting people into a box and saying, well, you can only do this, you can only do that, is a fairly modern idea, because people, when you grow up in places, in Middle Ages and going forward, this idea that the government was going to save you was, if you were on your own, right? You were out in the village. Yeah, you may have lived in the castle, but if the castle gets stormed, the king's not coming out to save you. You're on your
Right.
own. You need to do what you need to do, and good luck. So that's kind of this modern bubble wrapping of Western civilization, where it's trust the government. The government will take care of you, and all the other things. So yes, the glorious crown of martyrdom is a thing. I would be blessed enough to be a part of it. That's why I love the Martyrs Walk. You can check them out, themartyrswalk.com. Shameless promotion for them. You should check them out. But at the same time, I am not of the mind that you should just, also another crash joke, I'm not going to drop to my knees and let them kill my wife. Right? Yeah.
Right.
Oh, it's okay, honey. You're going to have to get a glorious crown of martyrdom. If my wife could mean mug me for eternity in the beatific vision, she probably would.
Yeah.
For being like, you let me die. Because it's not like they're going to come in and just be nice and kill her. Bad things are going to happen to her before that happens.
Right.
So
Well, I
the
think about
fact
that
that
too. I
you
mean,
just
I
want
have
to stand there.
children. Yeah. It's like
Yeah,
I
and
I
children
have
as well.
5 kids to provide for, and it's like, if something happens to me, I mean, that's a whole nother, yes, I entrust them to the Lord, of course. But there are things that we do to be prudent. It is not prudent to put if I have the means to stop something, then I ought to. If I have the means to save my own life and I'm able to do that, then I ought to do that for the sake of my children's. Same reason I should take care of myself and
Mhm.
eat well and things like that. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. But
Speaking of.
yeah. So there are so many things I want to talk about. I want to talk about like some of the basic things that people should know if they do want to own a gun, or if they maybe are afraid to use their guns, they maybe have one. What are like the basic things that they need to know about responsible gun ownership?
The first thing that I would recommend if you don't have a firearm is to go to some place like the uscca.com, because you can look up firearm ranges around there, and there are a plethora of firearm instructors who love having people come in. My favorite ones, ironically enough, are when a female comes in and says, "My husband wants me to take lessons because I live right near the gun range I work at is right next to Cavazos, which used to be Fort Hood, so we have to be politically correct in that regard. My husband's going out of town and he wants me to learn how to shoot." And so we're like, great, that's awesome. Come on in. We go over the 4 universal gun rules. Always shoot a gun as if it's loaded. Never point it at anything you don't want to destroy. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to destroy that object. And always be mindful of what is behind you. If everybody lives by those when they're around firearms, 99% of the time, everybody's going to be okay. I can't say 100% because you can't give 100% to anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll sit down with you and I will show you. You can either rent a gun from the range that I worked at, find a range that rents firearms too, so you can test which ones. Maybe you're only comfortable shooting a 22. Maybe you can shoot a 9. Maybe you can shoot a 12 gauge. The real problem is people go, and men and women go into gun stores never having shot a gun, never doing any of these things, and asking the guy who's getting paid probably $10 an hour, who's looking to sell things,
Mm-hmm.
what gun should I own? I actually had a guy ask me this the other day. He goes, "What's a good first gun?" And my response is, "Ooh, tough question. Because are you using it for home defense? Are you going to carry it? Have you ever shot one before? What's the size of your hand?" Because once again, being a dwarf, I was like, "Put your hand up." And this dude had like Michael Jordan size hands, like huge hands. And I was like, "Look at my hand." And my hand was tiny little hand. And I said, the gun that fits my hand is not the gun that fits your hand. And
Right.
fit is everything, because you'll be able to manage recoil. You'll be able to work the serrations. You'll be able to do a lot of other things that if somebody says, "Just take this Glock and go shoot," or "Just take this Smith and Wesson and go shoot." Let's say you go shoot it and you're like, "This gun is awful. I don't like it. It's too snappy. It's too heavy, whatever." Problem with guns is they're a lot like college books. You can't return them. Or if you try to trade them in, you're going to get a quarter of the value of what you bought it for. Nobody's going to give you equal value. Maybe you can trade it in and somebody will swap, but even gun stores aren't doing that much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to be careful with your initial purpose or initial purchase. And that's what I told the guy the other day. I was like, test out a couple guns, because that gun is going to be the thing that you need to run with. You need to be able to understand what happens when it malfunctions. You got to understand how to break it down. You got to understand all of these things. So if somebody was to come in, I would show them how to disassemble a gun. I would show them how to load a magazine, because believe it or not, when I've done LTC courses and LTC days, I had the sweetest woman. She was a little older than I was. And she came in and she's like, "My husband wanted me to get a CHL." Great thing. But this woman had never handled a firearm in her life. So I went, I'm not supposed to do this, but I was like, "This is how you load the magazine. You put in like this, and this is how we rack the slide, and we do all these," and kind of gave her a crash course, no pun intended,
Mm-hmm.
just to try and get her through it. And she was like on the verge of tears on the end of it, because if you've never been at a gun range and you've never heard a gun go off, it's kind of a lot to take in with the explosion that's going off in your hand. So there's a lot of things, which is why if you've never shot before with me, I'm going to rent a 22 and we're going to put 50 rounds of 22, because you're going to learn grip. You're going to learn stance. You're going to learn that you need to roll your shoulder a little bit and not do this crazy. Some people, my camera's about to, yep, that's my awesome camera right there, as you can say. A lot of people do this crazy hip hinge forward where they're almost perpendicular, vertical to the ground. No, I teach a slight roll of the shoulders and a slight hinge forward, so you can turn your body into a recoil spring, where you get your knees and you get a good fighting stance. We go over all of it, because people just think you buy the gun, you point it, and you shoot. And technically, that is all you need to do. But there's a lot more to actually be good at it, and to actually make sure you hit your target, that you can actually work your firearm in a stressful situation, because you're going to have an adrenaline dump. And all the things
Mhm.
that you think you're going to be able to do will not happen. Like these little things, I call these meat fingers, or meat sticks, because this stuff right here, you're not going to be able to do this anymore. These things are going to tense
Yeah.
right up. You're not going to be able to move them. So that's why whenever you see somebody who says, I'm just going to rack the slide and shoot somebody if they come near me, we all laugh and point at them, because you're not going to be able to do this. You're not going to be able to get on target within the 3 to 5 seconds that most of these encounters take. So a lot of instructors are really good. They love seeing new people come in, because you have an open mind. You push back against the propaganda, and you're concerned with your safety. And that's something I love to see. I love seeing people be autonomous, taking control, at least as much control as possible of said, your environment. And I really enjoy, women and men. The first time I had another female. This woman she was legit. She had a 45 and she was pounding this thing down range. And we had this target that had 4 dots on the corners, and she wanted to hit the top right corner. She couldn't hit it. And then I gave her one adjustment and she hit it. And the smile she had, it's just awesome to see people
Mhm.
be comfortable with it, because there is a bit of confidence that comes with that. Not overconfidence, but confidence in knowing that you have that skill, because it is such a thing. So there's
Yeah.
obviously a lot to talk about when bringing new people into the gun community.
How often would you say you should be shooting your gun to still, well, first of all, to be comfortable using it, but also maybe to be prepared in the event that you do need to use your gun? Like how often should you be shooting your gun and practicing?
For new guns, if you get a brand new gun, there's minimum. I'm going to go with the minimum, because people can argue with me, but minimum is 200 rounds. Um, to break the gun in. There are some guns that just need to kind of break in, get used to different kinds of ammo. Also, you need to shoot it, because if it jams, you got to learn which way to get, if it's a double feed or if it's a failure to extract or any of these other kinds of things. Also, you want to see if your gun runs properly and if it's not a lemon. I would say, somebody who wants to be proficient, probably, if we're going to break it up into quarters, 2 or 3 times a quarter.
Mhm.
Because I understand there aren't people, like I have a guy I work with, and every time he comes into work, he comes into work 30 minutes early and he puts 200 rounds down range. So
Wow.
he's shooting and
That's a lot of money.
yeah, but he also takes it out of his paycheck from the place he works.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Yeah.
So,
My mind was
uh,
like, "Oh, ammo is so expensive right
yeah,
now."
which is why like a
Yeah.
good 22 can be invaluable, because you can work, especially if you get the same system like a Glock for a Glock or something like that. You can
Mhm.
work controls, sight picture, all, stance and all these other things for a fraction of the cost. But yes,
Mhm.
ammo is expensive. So trying to take that into account, I'd say probably 3 times a quarter, just to kind of keep it going, because it is a perishable skill. And the more you shoot, the less, like right now, I could be sitting at the range, and we have a pistol and a rifle range, and we'll have AR-15s and shotguns going off here, and 12 to 15 people shooting pistols at different points. None of us who work there blink, right? We're
Right.
like, all right, we're used to the explosions. And so that's another thing you want to shoot, because you want to, and it happens to everybody, myself included. There is an initial fear the first time you shoot it, and you're like, oh wow, that really is a little explosion that just went off in my hand, and that's kind of
So
frightening,
true.
as it
Oh,
should
yeah.
be. So the more you shoot and the more you practice your fundamental rules and you work on your grip, the more you are adapting to it, and the more confident you will be when the time comes. Because you only rise. People think that every guy thinks they're going to turn into like Rambo or John Wick when the time comes. But the only problem is you're going to only rise to the level of your training. You're not going
Mhm.
to, you're not going to go red and all this stuff. You're only going to go as far as you've trained, whether that's dry fire, whether that's any of that other kind of stuff. So,
Mhm. Yeah, that's so true. Um, what does the catechism have to say? I mean, is there anything in particular that the catechism talks about in terms of gun ownership and self-defense specifically, or is it just a very general like, all right, self-defense, you're able to do that?
so, Father Petrie, I believe if I'm saying it right, put it perfectly. The Catholic Church doesn't think in terms of years. thinks in terms of centuries. So if you look at it, there's no hard and fast rule on anything like swords or knives. I was brought up by a good friend, Brother Andre Marie, when I made a quib about crossbows. And he was like, Richard, the crossbows actually were outlawed for a little bit before they realized it. So it's really on a case-by-case basis because, as said before, the Catholic Church thinks it's the long game. So they're not going to come down on a hard and fast rule, which is kind of weird when the bishops come down on a hard and fast rule on something that the church can't make a statement on. So it's not about whether it's a knife or a gun or a crossbow. It's about how have you gone through, and I like to talk about it, and it's in the book. I actually distill Augustine's just war theory as best I can to the personal level, because I feel every man is the defender of his home, his kingdom, his country. So if you can take the rules of just war theory and apply them to your own personal life, and as long as you are fulfilling the just war theory credentials, I guess, for lack of a better term, you're going to be in good standing. Now, for Catholics, it's actually pretty easy because we trace in the book as well the history of self-defense through England, back when England was Catholic. And a lot of our modern day principles are just reflections of the Catholic Church teachings. So as long as you are fulfilling the legal aspects, the church overall I get into hot water. I'm not saying it condones or even allows. It's just saying you are not violating, or you're not committing a mortal sin. Like Pope Pius XII, 1905, when he was asked, are there cases in which it's lawful to kill? And he responded, it is lawful to kill when fighting in a just war, when carrying out by order of the supreme authority a sentence of death and punishment of a crime, and finally, in a case of necessary and lawful defense of one's own life against an unjust aggressor. So if you, in your case, a 6'3" guy who's coming to hurt you, that is unjust aggression. You, Angela, have every right to do whatever you can to defend your life. You can't be like, oh, I only have a knife. Good luck, stabby stab. No, it's you have a gun, shoot him. And I've told my wife that too. If you're ever in that case, if I'm not home or something, you shoot the SOB until there's no longer a threat. That's just the case. Because my wife's 5'2". My wife's 5'2" and 100 pounds. So and so that's that whole case right there. So to answer the question, there's no hard and fast rule on any of it, because the Catholic Church doesn't, for lack of a better term, in my limited understanding, doesn't care about right now. It doesn't care about modern times. It doesn't care 1254, 2004, 3575. The Catholic Church, as we all believe, is eternal. The teachings are eternal, and so the teachings need to be eternal. And so it doesn't matter phasers or knives, as long as you are living the faith and you are practicing the faith in that way, it is permissible.
Well, and it would seem that even when we do try to outlaw guns and things like that, I mean, Washington, D.C. is the perfect example, or Chicago, things like that, where guns are totally outlawed. And yet they're some of the most violent cities in the entire country, some of the least safe cities. And so, of course, it's kind of like, I see some parallels too with the immigration issue. Like, you have legal immigration and you have illegal immigration. And yes, there are people who are going to come here illegally and they're breaking the law. That doesn't mean immigration should be illegal, for example. Same with gun ownership. I mean, just because there are people who are obtaining guns illegally, using them illegally, doesn't mean that gun ownership should be illegal. What do you say to people who make the claim that less guns makes us more safe?
So I was tagged on Twitter or Twix or X or whatever you want to call it, when we had a conservative say, gun owners should register guns and get cards and do all these other things and this, that, and the other. And I retorted, the idea of these laws, just look at them in practice. My favorite stat, and nobody likes to hear it on the left, California is number one, according to the group called Everytown, in gun law strength. They have everything and more you could dream of as far as gun control. The old thing, if you can dream it, you can be it. In California, if it's an anti-gun law, if it is even a thought in somebody's mind, it's already been signed. It doesn't even need to go through the legislative process. So nobody likes to hear that since 1983 to this year, 2023, California has 26 mass shootings, according to the Congressional Research Office, which is different than Gun Violence Archive, which is what the mainstream media uses, because they use this statistic where for Gun Violence Archive, a mass shooting is 3 or more people, regardless of the situation being shot at, drive-bys, all these other kinds of things. It helps boost those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Congressional Research Office and other methodologies state that a mass shooting is 3 or more people, or for Gun Violence Archive too, it's just shot and injured. For Congressional Research Office, it's shot and killed, not including the perpetrator, which is not involved in the commission of another crime. It is specifically the shooting. So when you use that actual criteria, we don't have that many mass shootings in these United States. That's why they use Gun Violence Archive, because it scares the hell out of everybody when they're like, we've had 700 of them this year. Well, 400 of them were in Baltimore, Chicago, and Miami. So I don't really know if we can count those. But the fact of the matter is, California, with that kind of data from 1983 to 2023, has had 26 mass shootings. The second state, Texas, has 13. And so when you give that data to them, and then you say the all the way back to the beginning of this year, there was a shooting, there was 2 mass shootings in California with guns that weren't allowed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter if it is a knife, a car, a gun. If somebody has the evil in their heart to harm people, they will do it, even if they just punch you really hard, right? People, you don't realize you can die by being punched in the face repeatedly. So this idea that we can outlaw the method, that's what they're concerned with, the method of the encounter, and not the fact that the encounter took place, is really a problem for a lot of people as well, because we bring up the fact that no, because once again, like we talked in the beginning, you're once again putting your trust in government. You're trying to put your trust in people who are behind walls with people who are guarding them with guns, as opposed to you. They don't really care if you get shot or killed. They just really want to push their agenda through. And so when you see these things,
well, they want money. I mean, it comes back, always comes back to money. I mean, that's really the root of all. That's the root of it all. And two, there you can see that there's a moral shift, right? People have always had guns and weapons to protect themselves. It's just that's something we've always had. That's what happens when you have tribalism, right? You're going to have warring tribes. It's from the dawn of time. People have had things to protect themselves. So what is it about this day and age that has made us so violent? And of course, like we would probably agree that we've rejected God.
That's first.
First and foremost, what else do you think is sort of, what are the common denominators of these mass shootings? Apart from the gun.
Right.
Like what else is it? What are the confounding factors that need to be talked about?
So for many of them, they are men. That does take place. Of course, there are females that it happens. They're just not as reported on. You can let's really break it down. The fact that the loss of God primarily, which translates into the loss of community, and community is built up by what? Community is built up by families. We have a significant reduction in families. We have a significant reduction in community, because of our transient society. I'm an awful example of that. I left my home state and now I live 1,800 miles from my family. And so we have to kind of cobble together our communities wherever we go. And so the fact of the matter is, when you used to have multi-generational homes and a neighborhood filled with multi-generational homes, everybody was accountable, everybody was there. With the progressive revolution that took place in the 60s, the loss for life through contraception and no fault divorce, and really this narcissistic, self-important attitude that we have created in Western society, that whatever is happening right now is the most important thing because it's happening to me. I mean, the shooting that took place in Louisville, couple weeks after the Covenant incident, the guy did it because he wanted to show how easy it was to get guns and have supposed mental health problems. That's a completely nihilistic attitude, because the guy was He was, he had lost hope. I guess maybe loss of God equals loss of hope, and loss of hope leaves man in a state of limbo here on earth where they really don't feel like they have a connection to anything. Comes with the rising number of single men who can't find families or purpose in life, and so they're floating around as they're being told that they are unimportant and that they are the causes for all of society's problems. We are seeing the end result of all of that programming. I mean, the Covenant Manifesto was full of that type of rhetoric. The person hated white people, they hated wealthy people, they hated Christians, they hated all of these things. And the fact of the matter is, without God and the Catholic Church, evangelical brothers and sisters, you guys, I love you. I pray for your conversion as you pray for mine. I hope I win. But the fact of the matter is, the Catholic Church has been the church as the one true church to stand in the breach. You and I, Angela, can agree that the Catholic Church has abdicated that role. They have stepped back and the sex scandal that took place was primarily the reason that the church stood back, because that's why, the errors, and we don't have to get into the errors of the Pope and the hierarchy in that regard, but that that incident caused the church to go on its heels and not talk about values, because now society can say, well, what about you with this, even though you're 100 times more likely to be abused or molested at a public school. If you even pay half of an attention to it, I try to highlight it every time it comes up on my feed. I'm like,
it's getting worse
another
too.
one.
It's
What?
getting worse too,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you have these groomers that are teaching your children. I mean, I could not have imagined my teachers talking to me about sexual topics as a child, and yet here we are. And the other common denominator that I don't think gets enough attention is that these people don't have fathers. These are fatherless homes, and it just again points to how necessary fathers are, good fathers, for creating healthy communities. And you're right that feminism has done so much damage in that regard. I mean, it stinks, because it really does sort of, in some way or another, it all sort of tracks back to Eve in the garden, right? I mean, it all sin does, of course, but it was her trying to gain knowledge and power and be an authority that she was not called to have,
Well,
right?
there's also the flip side, that Adam allowing it to take place and not
Absolutely.
asserting. So,
That
it's not this
effeminacy.
thing where it's like
Yeah,
throwing it all on Eve. It's like, no, both of them
both.
done messed up.
Mhm. And
Everybody's got enough blame to go around on this one.
so true.
So,
It's so true. Yeah, so there's one other question that I really have wanted to ask you. And I wonder, I'm like excited to see how you respond. Um, do you think that there are any regulations at all that should be in place on gun ownership? For example, ensuring that mentally ill people do not buy guns, things like that. Like, what are your thoughts? Is there anything that we should do as a bare minimum to ensure that healthy people are the ones that have guns?
should there be any restrictions on
Yeah.
your ability to speak?
Yeah.
Because that is a God-given right.
Mhm.
And yes, it's enshrined in the Second Amendment and in 44 out of the 50 state constitutions. Somewhere, your right to keep and bear arms. The fact of the matter is, when we had a high trust society, you could buy a Thompson submachine gun in the mail and have it mailed to your house. And
It's
people weren't having these issues.
right.
The fact is, now we have a society that is broken, fractured, and political. And we do not live in pre-crime. And I'll give you another example. Maine, with the Lewiston shooter, you had yellow flag laws, which in Maine, yellow flag laws mean you actually have to get a mental health professional's approval before you go in and restrict firearms. It's the only one that I even talk about, because at least there's a check, as opposed to red flag, where it just goes straight to the judge and he rubber stamps it. That didn't work there. The police who were with some of the police officers in Maine actually served with the killer and were like, hey, man, you're not doing too well. New York has red flag laws. The police botched 2 wellness checks on the actual shooter in Lewiston. So they completely dropped the ball. There were 4 or 5 different laws in place, besides the fact that you're actually not legally allowed to kill anybody, that were all violated. So I like to call it the sandwiching effect. Every time, or as I either the sandwiching or the Spaceballs effect, from the great movie Spaceballs at the end, where President Scrooge says, do something, Helmet says, do something, then he yells at the last guy and he just gets on the thing and he says, do something. You'll hear politicians, we need to do something.
Yeah.
No, you don't, because you had all these other laws in place and none of them got enforced. None of them were put in place. The Covenant shooter violated federal law by going into a gun-free zone. The fact of the matter is, these things are being violated all the time, and to sandwich another law on top of it just so you can feel better about supposedly doing something doesn't actually solve the issue. The issue is, if you have the ability to, you have the responsibility to carry a firearm and be prepared. The line that just absolutely punched me in the face when I read it from the Covenant Manifesto was, I am ready. I hope my victims aren't. I mean, that is it for gun control. You know, that their mindset is, I am ready and I'm going to a place where people are going about their day and they are not expecting to lose their life. Because if any of these cowards, whether it's Lewiston who went into a gun-free zone, or Louisville who went into a gun-free zone, or the guy in California who lived in a gun-free zone, they wouldn't go to your house where you have firearms. They wouldn't come anywhere near where I work because everybody there is armed because it's a gun range, or anywhere else, because they know they're going to get dropped. And not because you or I are ready to spill blood. It's because we have taken the responsibility by saying, I'm going to carry this firearm. I understand everything that goes with it, and I have accepted that today. And that's what people who carry firearm every day have to go through. Okay. And to be completely topical, I'm really kind of sad at the gun community. If you saw the picture of the guy in Panama who walked up and shot the protester.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing guys in the gun community make light of this, being like, he was sitting in the road, the guy deserved it. And it's like, guys, life is life. I get being inconvenienced on the highway is awful, and I don't like climate protesters either. But you don't walk up to a defenseless person and put 2 in their chest for the crime of inconvenience.
Right.
That's not how it works. That's the power of life and death, and must be treated as such. So once again, long answer to a short question. We don't live in a pre-crime society, and there's no regulation that you can put in place that can be enforced to the letter that would prevent all crime. And just one more thing with the Lewiston guy, there's an organization. If you go to my page, either Daily Mag Dump or I'm Catholic, one of those two. I have a great interview with Sarah Joy Albrick. She's the founder of this organization called Hold My Guns. It is a nonprofit private group that says, hey, are you struggling in any way, shape, or form with mental health issues? You go to our website, or your family member can go to the website, look up FFLs in your area. You bring the guns to the FFL, no questions asked. They will put them in that safe. The government doesn't touch them. You can keep them there as long as you want, so you can get the help you need. And the FFL doesn't care. They're like, all right, yeah, we'll hold them. And this organization is a proper response to what's going on as far as mental health crisis here, because it's a private solution that values both the gun owner's mental health and their right to property. You know, as Catholics, we have a right to property as well as in the 10 Commandments. So it fills that as well. So check out that one with Sarah Joy. She's fantastic. She's doing great work, and she's addressing an area in the gun community that people don't really like to talk about, because, you know, people don't want to talk about mental health anyway. They get very icky, and that's a problem, especially with men. But, you know, I try to speak as much as possible. Listen, guys, you know, mental health is a thing. You're not alone. And November is Mental Health Awareness Month for men, even though you wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You know, and that in my mind, I can hear people saying, well, just because there are always going to be people who ignore laws, that doesn't mean we shouldn't have them. For example, we have laws against homicide. And it's good to have those laws, right? It's good to have laws against homicide, and therefore we don't stop having laws against it, even though people are going to ignore the law. But on the flip side of that too, I think one of the strongest arguments you can have in favor of not restricting gun ownership, and I just thought of this, is that your mental health state, it's not static. It is something that will change over time. And so we cannot craft laws when it comes to something that doesn't have a static nature, it will fluctuate over time.
There's no rubric for it.
Right, like you could get a gun at some point when you're healthy and later develop very severe depression, and just because you might be at risk at some point in your life of developing depression, that doesn't mean we can guess that and say, "Sorry, you can't get a gun today." Even though you did all the stuff, you did all the right things, you went to the classes, you shot the gun, you did all of your stuff, you know how to handle your firearm. Now, sorry, we can foresee that 10 years from now, you're going to be depressed and a threat to society. There's no way of doing that. So,
Also, we're not giving people the ability to rehabilitate, right? If somebody breaks your leg, everybody's like, "We'll be there and we're going to help you no matter what." Have you ever heard somebody say, "Hey, man, I'm having some struggles health wise, whatever the fact may be, whatever"? People scatter like cockroaches when the lights come on, and it's awful. And that's why veterans don't want to talk about it. That's why men especially don't want to talk about it, because they'll be labeled as a crazy person instead of, "Hey, man, you're going through some stuff, whatever it is." All
yeah,
right. Go to holdmyguns.org, go hold it. We'll support you. And guess what? The big thing in Lewiston is that he was involuntarily committed. If he had voluntarily committed, he wouldn't have been
angry.
restricted from purchasing a firearm, which is the correct way to do.
Mm,
Because if you take that step and you try to address it, you shouldn't be punished for like
right.
you said, for doing the right thing.
Hmm. Wow, that's really interesting. Well, I'm glad that I asked you that question. Do you have any final thoughts about what it means to be a Catholic that owns a firearm, and what can we do more to integrate these two topics together?
So to be a Catholic and to own a firearm is completely one of the mottos for my organization's first class firearm training, with a foundation of Catholic tradition, because the two are compatible. And I believe that. I believe that the practice of the faith and the responsible ownership of firearms go hand in hand with each other. In order to integrate it, I think we have to. It's the same thing as what we're dealing with right now with something like abortion. We had a bad election cycle. If you went on Twitter, you thought it was the one issue we should never run on again and for the history of the world, and we should get rid of it. And
Yeah.
I was battling people in the gun community who were telling me it's a bad issue, read the room and leave it. And I'm like, if you abandon one of your core principles because you had a bad cycle, do you realize that if you have a rash of anti-gun laws that go through, by your logic, time to get rid of guns, because that's a losing issue as well. And
Mhm.
so
So
the
true.
right to life, and somebody asked this question in the chat, how do you distinguish somebody who says you can't be pro-gun and pro-life? Well, that's bollocks, because the fact of the matter is, just as we defend conception to natural death, you, Angela, myself, everybody in the chat, even non-believers, right, non-Catholics, y'all have a right to live, and you
Mhm.
have a right to defend your life. That's one of them. Fight or flight response, it is a natural thing.
Right.
If it wasn't, it would just be dead response. We just freeze like possums and die,
Well, it wouldn't make
because
sense to have the right to life without a right to defend your life. Like, it
Mhm.
would it literally would not make sense. You don't have a right to life and then not to protect your own life.
Mm,
Otherwise, then you
so
would have
yeah,
no need for that right in the beginning, I mean, to begin with, so,
exactly
yeah.
right. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So people, I know you've plugged your website, but I want you to do it again. Where can people listen to you and check out your work at News from the
So
Pews and all kinds of stuff? Like, where can people connect with you?
So I'm actually, as soon as I get off with you, I'm jumping on with Steve and Fwaz and John. We're going to be doing our episode of News from the Pew. It's on News from the Pew YouTube channel, or on Spiritus, or on any of the Rumble, if you're a fan of the Rumble or any of that stuff. Same goes for me. I am at The Armed Catholic on YouTube. Also Armed Catholic on Rumble and on YouTube and on any of these other places, as well as one of my interviews comes up as I look it up so I can make sure. Just The Armed Catholic, L Armed Catholic on Twitter, because for some reason Elon Musk could not get it so I could fit the. So
Oh,
it is L Armed Catholic.
and Espanol, just that
That's
one
right.
word.
I had to invoke my wife's heritage to try and
That's
fit
so
it
funny.
on there. So I am L Armed Catholic on the Twitter X, or whatever the case may be, whatever you want to call it at that time. On Instagram, because I got nuked It is This Armed Catholic if you want to follow me on Instagram, and then just thearmedcatholic.com. If you are ever interested in your parish or men's group or anybody wanting me to fly out to your place and give a talk, I have a talk that I gave at the St. Benedict Center. It's pretty much based off the book I wrote, applying these Catholic social teachings to justify self-defense. Also, I do a church security course, just giving you the basic outlines. Because one thing that gets me so frustrated is when I talk about it and then some guy hits me up on Twitter. He's like, me and 5 other guys, we got guns, we're ready. I'm like, you're good as dead, because you don't have a plan. You don't have distinguishing marks to say who the bad guy is, who's the good guy. You don't have a plan to call the ambulance. You don't have a first aid kit. You don't have a trauma kit. And they're all like, but I got a gun. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. Thanks. So if you'd like me to fly out wherever to give a presentation, as an instructor, I can do instructions on church security, whatever the case may be, thearmedcatholic.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm always honored to come and talk, and I've been waiting for the invite for a while, so I'm happy to finally be able to do it.
God bless you, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
God bless.